Hey guys, how are you all doing? I know it's been a minute, and I'm just not even going to address that. I'm just going to dive right into this build, because that's why you clicked on the video. So this is a rune level 60 Dex Faith build. I usually am playing Seamless these days because activity in vanilla is just really not that great, and Seamless is fun because you get to invade more areas, you get to ride your horsey around. It's all around a good time, and honestly a better experience, and more of an experience that I want to experience than the vanilla experience. The whole idea behind this build, which is called the Golden Thorn, is that it does fully poking damage. A lot of it's physical damage, but there's so many weapons and spells and little Ashes of War that do poking things that are associated with the Golden Order. Lore-wise for this character, Golden Thorns are like a not super prevalent but somewhat common theme in Elden Ring. After defeating Morgot, you're presented with this little message that's like, the impenetrable thorns of the Erd Tree block your way. So this is kind of supposed to be like an elite guardian. You know how the other guardians have those sword spears and they do some poison attacks, and they are either like buds or blooms or like branches, kind of? I wanted this to really evoke like a thorn, which is supposed to be kind of like an elite, impenetrable member of this tree-worshipping cult. So what does this build do? It pokes with things that are gold, like a golden thorn, per se. This is a Dex Faith build, at rune level 60, with plus 12 weapons, plus 5 Somber. It's really built around the throwing knives from the DLC, which are holy infused, and then something pokey in the offhand, which is almost always the tree spear, but sometimes is also maybe like the Banished Knight's halberd, which is long and golden and pokey as well. Now, the throwing knives from the DLC might be a bit of an odd choice, because I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that they suck, that they aren't very good, that they seem to be incapable of doing real damage, and you would not be wrong. They kind of are incapable of doing real damage. However, there are ways you can stack some buffs and some damage on top of this. Spider Florist showed me this one thing you could do, which is you could get the Golden Epitaph, which is a pretty mediocre and forgettable faith-based straight sword from the base game. But what's nice about it is it has a unique body buff as its Ash of War, which is Last Rites, which applies just like a flat number of holy damage to your weapon. I think it's like a flat 25 holy damage plus a like modifier depending on how much faith you have, which comes out to around 60 to 80, depending on how much faith you have. And on Seamless, that usually translates to somewhere between 90 and 110 damage against Seamless hosts at rune level 60 with plus 12 weapons. Which is not great, but it's also really not bad at all, considering a lot of people don't have a lot of health on Seamless. Which isn't a bad thing, because Seamless is really not too difficult to win invasions on. You could easily bring something horrific from the DLC that also happens to have lots of golden thorns, like the Greatsword of Damnation, which I will admit the thought did cross my mind, but I'm not about to do that to the poor feckless folks of Seamless. But I brought some of the weaker, goofier things from the DLC, because the DLC has a lot in the way of golden things that poke or golden things that resemble horns, which we'll get to in a sec here. I did want to plug the Tree Spear, which has been around since, the base game launched. The Tree Spear is not an amazing weapon. In fact, I would kind of describe it as the Mesmer's Soldier Spear for hipsters, because it's like the same moveset, but it has to be for a Dex Faith build. It's like buffable, and it is upgraded using regular smithing shards, but it's like you don't get to change the Ash of War, and the Ash of War is like one of the lamer weapon buffs in the game. So it's like if you really wanted a good Great Spear, there's so many other better ones to choose from, but it just has a really nice moveset, and it fits this build perfectly, and has made me appreciate Great Spears in this game. For the longest time, I've kind of avoided Great Spears because I've just kind of viewed them as purely poking weapons that just, the worst people you know love to power stance. But they're really like just a two-handed great spear with like decent R2s like the tree spear has, or like the Mesmer soldier spear has, is so good in this game. Great spears in general are one of like the few weapons in Elden Ring that seem to have its like priority straight, in that when you hit somebody you have priority. So many other weapons just don't function like that, and I am very thankful that great spears do. They also tend to have a really nice rolling attack. I'm not talking about what is the Rykard one. You know which one I'm talking about. The only weapon Steelovsky seems to know how to use. It's the one that still has like the unnerfed crouch poke. Not that one. Most of these spears have like a sweeping rolling attack, which is really nice for like you dodge maybe like 2 or 3 people all doing an attack at once, and you just give them a little swipe as a like, all right, get off me kind of damage. It's nice. It's a very nice weapon. It's not good, but it's a very nice weapon. The other golden poking weapon I've been using a lot is the Cleanrot spear, which is hilarious in that it has become one of the best weapons on this build. And like from 3 or 4 years of playing this game, this weapon has always sucked in the hands of every single other build I've used, and on Seamless it just annihilates people. Like the amount of one-shots I've gotten with the Cleanrot spear is a little egregious, considering that like the windup is telegraphed. The like spears are about to shoot out of the ground animation is telegraphed. And even then, it's all very rollable. Like you can just like see all this coming. You can even get hit by the windup and still roll out of this, but people don't, because it's seamless co-op. What are we doing here? Anyways, this weapon is also very fun because it has the double thrust R2s. So it ends up just being a fun weapon that is very viable at rune level 60 on seamless co-op. This is also the closest I will ever feel like a Spear of the Church. This is kind of like a Thorn of the Church for Elden Ring, if you will. But in Dark Souls 3, I really liked the Spears of the Church Covenant. I really liked the Spear Fragment, which just lets you cast like a wall of spears shooting out of the ground. And I was kind of hoping they had something similar for like a spell in the DLC or an incantation in the DLC. But I'll take this for now. I'm pretty sure the VFX of the spears shooting out of the ground are like 1-for-1 copied over from Dark Souls 3. I should definitely mention a few other weapons I like using with this build a lot, one of which is the Horned Warrior Curve Swords. I really like that they brought back more paired weapons in the DLC. This weapon doesn't really make any sense to me because there's nothing about its Ash of War that really goes with the weapon's moveset. But I really like the Ash of War because it does this big, like, sprouty kind of... I know it's supposed to be a horn, but, like, suspend your disbelief for a second and just pretend that's a big golden thorn shooting out of the ground. Got me? Okay. That's a fun one. I also love doing the R2 feint backflips with curved swords. I just do those constantly, even if it gets me killed every now and then. And then I think the last weapon here, which is just my, like, alright, I've had enough of you weapon, which is Rajir's Rapier buffed with Sacred Blade. So, Sacred damage stacked with Sacred Blade. Its R2s do the double thrust. It's more golden poking. There was definitely a moment here where I looked at this weapon and was like, ooh, but I could do an Antspur Rapier here instead. And I know it's rune level 60. I know these people have been playing the game for a certain amount of hours at rune level 60. I still can't quite justify using Rot, because if I am able to proc Rot, I'm probably able just to kill these people with the amount of thrust that it would take to proc the Rot anyways. This is something I was like throwing around in my head when I was making this build, and I was like, ooh, you know what? Like, rune level 60 is probably the last place I can viably make a Eclipse Shuttle build and also use Fia's Mist, because at rune level 60 is kind of like the last level that Source Seals still work for, where like they start to fall off pretty quickly after rune level 60. So I was like throwing together this idea of like, oh, I could do this Dex Faith build that can drink its physic and get up to 23 int and still use Fia's Mist on a staff. And then I was just kind of like, wait, I am at 60. and the buffed version of the Eclipse Shuttle will just kill people before I can ever proc Deathblight. So I just never bothered with that build. I really would love to make a Deathblight build at some point, but every time I kind of parse it out, I'm just like, well, people will probably just be dead if I hit them 4 times with the buffed Eclipse Shuttle. So, like, what am I doing? I'm basically just running a Sacred Blade Curved Sword build at that point. Oh, one thing I should mention about Scattershot Throw, while it's not great for actually hitting people with, it is excellent and seamless at dismounting folks. Scattershot Throw 100% will hit Torrent if they're in range and will knock them off their horse, which is sometimes very, very, very necessary in Seamless. People get very annoying with their horses, and being able to just like smack them on the ground real quick is quite good. I think also Pawn Shop Ghost showed me this the other day too. And maybe I mentioned this in my last video. I'm not sure. But anyways, in order to properly do the riposte for folks on the ground in Seamless after you've knocked them off of Torrent, you gotta target like their left foot. If you can get to their left foot while they're on the ground, you can do the riposte there, and anywhere else it likely will not work, and you'll probably just like smack them in the head. Frosty might have pioneered and popularized the handy technique, but I really, really would like Pawn Shop Ghost to popularize the left foot technique in Seamless at the very least. Lest we forget that I still consider myself in the Age of Mage, because I am playing the game Elden Ring, where hit stun priority is typically out of whack and magic is really good. So let's cover our golden spells, our golden Thorn spells specifically. A disclaimer here, I decided not to use any of the Thorn sorceries outside of Mantle of Thorns, which I don't have any clips of me using because it's a pretty useless spell. I didn't really want to use any of the base game Thorn sorceries because those are all like bright red, and I would have to swap to a staff to use them, and they're pretty situational, and they're not like very usable in a lot of different circumstances. So I just don't love using those. And then Impenetrable Thorns, I just don't get. Like on launch for the DLC, it just nuked people. Like I got like one shot all the time by people using that, and then they nerfed it, and now when I try to use it, it hits people for like 80 damage. Like 80 damage flat at like rune level 150 and above. So I don't get it, and I'm not gonna bother to try to like use a different staff in my main hand just to cast like 3 different very situational but typically pretty useless Thorn sorceries. So I thought I'd make up the Thorns in the aggregate by just like, you know, lying to myself and pretending that things that are clearly different are actually in fact golden Thorns. So here's a fun little tier list. In S tier is Aspect of the Crucible Horn, which we'll pretend is called Aspect of the Crucible Thorn. Wait, that actually exists. Oh wait, it's fucking dog shit. You can't hit anything with this. Like, even if people stand there and take the stupid porcupine thorns right to the face, it will probably do somewhere in the ballpark of like 300 damage. It is not good whatsoever. Great, I already messed up my tier list. I started with Thorn. Thorn's kind of the only good one. I've actually come around to Aspect of the Crucible Bloom. That's pretty fun for just getting people to move a little bit. Most people are familiar with the attack because there's so many Miranda flowers in the game that do this exact attack. But it just kind of gets them to move out of an enclosed space. You'll see this a lot where like 2 or 3 people will just sit in a room and be like, come in here. Come in here and walk into our attacks, and I don't want to do that. So you'll cast, you know, Aspect of the Crucible Bloom at them, and at least gets them panicking. It gets them trying to run out of the room. It just kind of mixes up the situation a lot. It reminds me a lot of the same kind of use case of the Millwood Bow in Dark Souls 3. Next, I guess we got to talk about it, is Divine Bird Feathers. I know people all kind of know this is useless, and I was like, well, it can't be that useless, and it actually surpassed my expectations of uselessness. I cannot think of a PvE, a PvP like use for this spell at all. It is so incredibly slow. It does not do any real damage. It doesn't stun people properly. It just doesn't do anything. And I think some people are saying like, oh, we could use it to pop people's bubble tiers. Why? Like, you have fan daggers. You have like the Briar set. You have like so many different options to pop people's bubbles tiers, and you want to like use this spell that takes forever to cast. Like, you can't even use this as a proper finisher. It's just like, I don't understand what the use case of this is, and it reminds me a lot of Spyra, which is a totally different kind of spell, but is also another one of those Divine Tower spells from the DLC, except Spyra costs like 48 faith, and it, I think, takes up 2 attunement slots, which is really funny, and then does like not very good damage at all. It has a super telegraphed attack, and then can't even be chain cast. And then in classic Elden Ring fashion, there's an Ash of War that does exactly what this spell is trying to do, but better, which is the Divine Warrior Curved Swords. Ash of War is just like much better version of this exact spell. So yeah, it's too bad because I like the aesthetics of these spells a lot, but the only really good like Thorn that I'm actually using on this build is the aspect of the Crucible Horn. I was using Pest Thread Spears a little bit here and there. They just are a little too buggy, as in like they are meant to be used by an actual bug person, not that they like have a glitch or anything. They just are a little too buggy for a build about thorns and trees. I tried to justify it for a little bit, but ultimately I just had more fun focusing on throwing daggers and poking people with long poking weapons. Now, I know this is rune level 60. I would have loved to have cast Minor Erd Tree just to like throw down a tree and be like, look, I love trees. I don't, you know, this is like the Lorax kind of build, right? I love trees. Unfortunately, it does cost 70 faith, so I will not be doing that, sadly. If I were to replicate this build at rune level, I don't know, 150, maybe rune level 200, maybe I could do that. But if I was doing that kind of build, I would not be relying on pokes. I would be relying on nuclear damage from afar, which would likely include what is the Mikola Orbital Strike? Isn't that the Divine Light of Mikola? Or, yeah, Light of Mikola? I think I would just use that instead. But someday I do hope to be able to properly plant trees with this Thorn build. To kind of wrap up the video here, I did want to talk about some of the stuff I didn't use and why, and also why I'm making this build at rune level 60 instead of later rune levels. And so I think since my last video, I've been trying higher level builds. I made some builds around rune level like 168 and was playing around with those that were kind of like inspired by Night Rain, like the Everdark bosses especially. Those were fun, but just unseamless especially, but also very much vanilla. It's really hard to get activity above rune level 100. You can find it, and it's definitely there, but there's just so many fog walls that I just like, you load into an invasion, you walk around for 15 seconds, and then it's like, oh, the host has begun fighting the boss, and you're like, okay, crap. So there's just been so many of those, and it's just such a waste of time, and I have such a limited amount of time to play this game these days that when I sit down, I just want to get activity. Like when I sit down to play this game, I just want to play the game. So I end up making builds around where there is activity, and there is always activity at lower levels. Basically anything below rune level 100, which is too bad because that means I'll probably never cast Minor Erd Tree against like another real person. And I'll probably never cast something completely insane like Bale's Tyranny, or I don't know, one of the really big Midra's Flame of Frenzy or something like that. There's a bunch of these spells that I was never cast because I'm never going to make a build at beyond rune level 150 unless, I don't know, there's a huge revitalization, which probably isn't going to happen. Which makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that there's more activity early on in games than like later levels, because I think it's just a little bit more concentrated. Most people in Dark Souls are like still going through the early levels, and then they may or may not like keep playing throughout the entire game after a certain point. They also might just hit a point where their friend stops playing and it's just them, and now they're no longer getting invaded because they're no longer summoning anyone. So I end up just making these lower level builds to try to gather up as much activity as I can. One thing I was throwing around the idea of, I was kind of hoping, in my heart of hearts, I knew this wasn't realistic, but I was kind of hoping that Shadow of the Erdtree would just be like a full reset, or there'd be like an option to start Shadow of the Erdtree at like base level and have everything kind of scaled down to like a full playthrough of a game. Like you could I wonder if there's a mod out there that would have done this, but like you could feasibly just make Shadow of the Erdtree a standalone game, replace like the Skibidi whatever fragments with golden seeds instead, and just make that like the upgrade system for your flask. There's just like ways that you could make Shadow of the Erdtree a standalone playthrough, and I was always kind of interested in like what that would be like. But anyways, my point there is that Shadow of the Erdtree assumes you're going to be at rune level like 150, really. Maybe like 125 or something like that. And for activity purposes, that kind of sucks. And so invasion-wise, like Shadow of the Erdtree didn't really change too much. It just added a whole bunch of new stuff I could use. But it didn't really change like the game for an invasion standpoint, because you're not, like, I never get invasions in DLC levels pretty much ever. And I did at launch with, you know, DLC level characters, but nowadays activity at those ranges is pretty sparse, and half the time, 75% of the time I'd actually say, is like base game content anyways. So this is all to say, you know, not much has changed for me. I'm sticking to lower levels. I'm sticking to stuff that's in my stat range for those relatively lower levels. And this is kind of where I'm going to be at until we get a brand new game. That all being said, I have a rune level 81 Faith build that I am really excited about. Actually, a lot more excited about than this build that I'd love to show pretty soon. So yeah, keep an eye out for that in the next, I was going to say next couple of weeks, but you know, given how I operate these days, it might be the next couple months. But I hope to be doing this a little bit more consistently in the near future. So that's all from me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.